We really finished this question from John 12:27 that Jesus asked, and just as we pointed out last week, I think I can't say it just dogmatically with 100% certainty, but it seems to me that this clearly is really the question is here, where Jesus says, what shall I say? And I would almost tend to make that more like a colon. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this cause came I into this hour. In other words, what am I supposed to do? Pray to be delivered from this, but this is why I came to this earth. And we talked about that, and he's saying he's not going to shirk, he's not going to shrink back from the task that has been given to him from the Father. He's going to do the Father's will. And even in the garden, in that deepest, most intense agony, he's going to pray, not my will, but thine be done. And so over and over again, you see Jesus, he's going to do the will of the Father. And so, of course, he says, Father, glorify thy name. There's this voice from heaven saying, I've both glorified it, will glorify it again. And so some of the people stood by. They thought that it thundered. Some people thought an angel spoke to him. But Jesus tells them, this voice didn't come from me, but for your sakes. And he says, now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Verse 33 is an inspired commentary on that. This he said, signifying what death he should die. Now the people answered him, we have heard out of the law that Christ abideth forever. How sayest thou, the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? And so Jesus answers in verse 35, yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knoweth not whither he goeth. While you have light, believe in the light, that you may be the children of light. These things spake Jesus, and departed, and did hide himself from them. And then you got this section dealing with the unbelief of the Jews, a statement in verse 37 that's just one of those that no matter how many times you read it, it just never ceases to amaze, or at least for me. Though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not on him. Not everybody, but many of them. In spite of all the miracles, a number of them still don't believe. And verse 38 references that is just as exactly as Isaiah had prophesied, that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spake, Lord, who hath believed our report? To whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe, because that Isaiah said again, he hath blinded their eyes, hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. It's not that they were incapable. Sometimes people misunderstand that and put kind of a Calvinistic slant on this. It's not saying they're incapable. He's saying Paul deals with this in 1 Corinthians 2, talking about the carnal man. The carnal man can't believe in God. And again, that Calvinistic mindset says, well, because you're in the flesh and the flesh is so sinful and you're born sinful, you just can't believe in God. You can't come to God even if you wanted to, which goes counter to so many other passages. And I've often said there are passages that are easier than others. There are some passages that are more difficult to understand. But if you come across a passage or if you come up with an interpretation or read an interpretation, hear an interpretation that contradicts so many other plain scriptures, that's very obviously, that can't be the right interpretation. And so Jesus is not saying here, John, through the Spirit, no more than Paul in 1 Corinthians is saying, you just can't, incapable, saying, as long as you're in that mindset, Paul talks about the carnal man, as long as you're minding things of the flesh, as long as your attention is on that type of thing, you're not going to be capable of pleasing God until and unless you change that mindset. We sometimes say you got to have a change of heart. And that's the idea here. Here are people that their hearts are so hardened that they're seeing numerous miracles. Sometimes they're getting together and saying, well, what are we going to do? Can't deny he's done a true miracle, and yet they still don't believe. Yeah, if you've got a heart like that, you cannot believe unless and until you change that heart, that mindset. And then verse 41 is an interesting commentary on Isaiah chapter 6, which is where this quote from Isaiah comes from. These things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. Well, what's he saying there? Yeah, in Isaiah 6, Isaiah chapter 6, again, this is the source of this quote from Isaiah. That is the call of Isaiah. And Isaiah's recording how he had this vision, this magnificent vision of the throne of God and God on his throne and all his glory, the angel coming and touching his mouth with the hot coal. None of this real, of course. This is kind of a vision that he's having. And he's so enamored, so impressed, so taken aback by this vision of just this vision, manifestation of the glory of God, so enthralled by that when God says, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Isaiah's like, here am I, send me. But we learn from John, right here in John 12:41, the vision he saw was of the second person of the Godhead, the pre-incarnate Christ. And so you may have, if you got cross-references in your Bible, you may have a cross-reference back to Isaiah 6, but if not, you might want to jot that in there or add that, because that is an inspired commentary on Isaiah chapter 6. Now, verse 42, nevertheless among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Again, people like this, if you love the praise of men more, you care more about being approved by men than being approved by God, well, it just goes back to that verse 39 there, that statement of Isaiah, you cannot believe as long as you got that kind of an attitude. But when we determine that God's approval is most important, and now we're ready to be in a position to come to Jesus, to believe on him, to obey him, and to be his disciples. But these folks, some of them were so hard-hearted that they just, even seeing the miracles, they just didn't believe. Others saw and believed to the extent of being like, well, they're convinced, but then they sort of go, oh, but boy, they'll kick me out of the synagogue. And we see this today sometimes. You ever see somebody that maybe they say, oh, well, what would my friends say? What would my family say? Oh, don't you understand? I'm very involved in this denomination, this sectarian group. If I left that, boy, that would just be, and all the different things that people will say. But well, who are we following? Whose approval is the most important? And I'm not saying that to try to oversimplify, because I know it's simpler talking about it in this setting than putting that into practice in life, because these situations are very real. I studied with a family member one time, and got to the point, and I mean, like, I'm not feeding answers. We're just studying. And at one point, this family member looks at me and says, I need to be baptized. I've not, I thought I was a Christian, but I haven't done what the Bible says to become a Christian. and like, just in that moment, struck with that truth, convicted. And I had just started working with the Ironitan church, and just so happened they had, I don't know, a week or so before that, they'd happened to give me a key to the building. I said, let's go. I don't know why I didn't just think to go, like, right next door to my folks' house. This was a relative that lived very close to me because my parents have one of those smaller in-ground pools, but plenty of space there plenty of water there to baptize and immerse someone. But nevertheless, I said, let's go. And I was ready. I'm like getting stuff together, and like you could just see the countenance change. A realization came over this person. They said, Mom will never go for that. And we talked about it, and I said over and over again, this is family. I love my family. But if family would hold you back from serving God, then you got to obey God. We went to Acts 5:29. We ought to obey God rather than men. Nothing worked. And finally it was settled on, okay, let's sit down with Mama and let's try to have a study and explain, let her see where you're coming from. Okay, but it never happened. And to this day, never has obeyed the gospel. Many of those family members have gone on from this life, never having sat down with us to have that study, and this particular relative never did obey the gospel. So we got to be more concerned with the approval of God. Here are people that believed on Jesus, but they did not confess him because they are so scared of being put out of the synagogue. And so then Jesus goes on in verse 44, mentions this about he that believeth on me, believeth not on me, but on him that sent me. He that seeth me, seeth him that sent me. I am come a light into the world, but whosoever believeth on me should not abide in darkness. If any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. Sometimes people say, well, that's contradictory, because he turns right around in verse 48 and says, he that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words hath one that judgeth him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. For I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment what I should say and what I should speak. Well, he's not saying there that that he didn't come to judge, period. But he's saying, I came to this earth for the purpose of helping people, saving people. But if they disobey, if they refuse him, well, then there's judgment. There's an answering for that. If somebody comes in a situation, it could be a workplace, it could be a school, and maybe somebody comes in with authority that's been given to them, and they say, hey, look, I'm not here to, maybe an education setting is a good example. And this new teacher could be a substitute teacher, whatever in the situation may be, but they've got this authority, and they say, hey, look, I'm not here to make life miserable for y'all. I'm here to help y'all. I want to help you in every way possible. But you got this one kid, or maybe it's a group of kids at the back of the room, and they're just like, bah, ha, ha, they're laughing, they're having a good time, they're not serious, they don't want to respect this person. Well, what do you do? Well, I didn't come here for that, to be a disciplinarian, so, just, y'all, if you don't mind, I came here to help y'all now. But at some point, there has to be judgment, disciplinary action. It may be sending them out of the room, it may be going to the principal, it may be whatever. But there's got to be. And so that's the idea here that Jesus is talking about when he says, I didn't come to judge the world, but to save the world. He says, my primary purpose is coming here to save the world, but if people reject me and receive not my words, there is going to be a reckoning. And so that's that idea there. And then finally, verse 50, and I know that his commandment is life everlasting, whatsoever I speak therefore, even as the Father said unto me, so I speak. That brings us into chapter 13. Again, we are in the last week of Jesus' life. We're really getting down to like the last night of Jesus' life at this point. John spends quite a bit of time on the last week, but even the last night, he's got a pretty decent amount of time just on that. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. I love that statement there, that Jesus, he loved them unto the end. Jesus is going to do his part in teaching, doing the Father's will, and when this all kind of falls apart, so to speak, and they forsake him, it's not like any of them in the garden are going to say, well, I mean, he'd do the same thing, so I'm out of here. Sometimes people do that. They're supposedly friends or whatever. They get into a situation and the guy says, well, hey, I mean, you wouldn't go to the point of persecution for me, so I'm sorry, bro. I like you and all, but I'm out of here. No, Jesus, he loved them unto the very end. And so supper being ended, kind of a manuscript difference here. If you've got, let's see, I think I've got my comparisons up here. So, get to New American Standard has during supper. New King James says supper being ended, but it looks like there's a note there. Yeah. I can't remember I think New United is what NU stands for. So it's a manuscript family for New Testament edition. ESV has, I don't know why ESV didn't sync up with that verse, during supper. And American Standard also has during supper. All that was just to say, it seems that during supper is the more accurate translation here, because when you put all the gospel accounts together, it doesn't seem they're done with supper at this point. This is during supper. Nevertheless, supper being ended or during supper, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth from supper, laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. It's a familiar account to us. And after that he poureth water into a basin. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Now, again, it's familiar to us. And then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter says to him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? It's kind of like, we might say, I don't think so. And Peter means no disrespect here. I think we all understand that. But he says, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, what I do, thou knowest not now. And man, that's another one. Do I have my highlighter? Yeah. This little phrase right here, that was not the best highlight. There's a specific context, obviously, that we're looking at here, but that statement applies to so many things in the earthly ministry of Jesus when it came to the apostles. What I do, you don't understand right now. But, and see if I can do like a different color here just to show the contrast. But thou shalt know hereafter. And there's your contrast. He says, you don't understand it now, but you will later. And again, we're not to that point yet, but in John 14 and also in 16, really that section of 14 through 16, he's going to tell them, I'm going to send the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, and he's going to show you all things, and what else? Do what? Bring to your remembrance all that I've said to you. And there are a couple of different occasions, even in the book of John, where John will say, in fact, if you recall, I know it's been a while since we were in John chapter 2, but in John chapter 2, when Jesus cleanses the temple very early in his ministry, we talked about that. Sometimes people say, well, you see here that there's some contradiction because Matthew and Mark have this happening late in the ministry of Jesus. Well, there's no contradiction. Duh, it happened twice. Once early in his ministry, once later. But early in his ministry, John chapter 2, he cleanses the temple, drives out those money changers and so on. But it says that the disciples remembered the passage, the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Then there's, what was the other one I was thinking of? I just went blank. There's another one where it says, when Jesus was risen from the dead, they remembered this saying. And so again, but it's all this same idea here. Jesus says, what I do now, you don't know. You don't understand now, but you will. And so Peter, because just as Jesus said, he doesn't understand. He says, you never wash my feet. Not a chance. And Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. And then Simon, as we might expect from Simon Peter, he says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Just wash me all together. Kind of reminds us of Psalm 51, where David says, create in me a clean heart, the idea of being cleansed. And so Peter says, hey, if this is part of being a disciple, then not just my feet, but everything. Yes, sir, you were going to say something, Robert?
I think it's a practical lesson to his closest disciples of an event that was taking place in the discussion that they would have by James and John and their mother.
Say that again now.
Do you think it's a practical lesson that Jesus was giving to his disciples because of the
Oh, yeah.
that James and John had, and the other disciples kind of got upset about it, and who would be sit on the right and the left?
Yeah, that was, not that far antecedent to this, that James and John come to Jesus, and again, putting gospel accounts together, they come to Jesus sort of by proxy, at least at some point. And the accounts don't tell us which happened first. At some point, their mother spoke to Jesus. It seems at some point they spoke to Jesus. It may have been one way, one first, the other, or it might have been the opposite. But yeah, they want to sit, one on the right hand, one on the left. And Jesus says, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink of? And that has nothing to do with Lord's Supper or anything like that. He's talking about the cup of suffering. He's going to drink fully of the cup of suffering. Oh, yeah, we can drink that cup. He didn't say the cup of suffering. He just says, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? They say, oh, yeah, absolutely. And he says, can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? Absolutely. Of course, again, the baptism that he's talking about there has nothing to do with water. It's a figurative baptism of suffering. Jesus was going to be immersed in suffering. And they say, of course, yes, absolutely, we can do that on both counts. Check, check. And Jesus says, well, you will. You will drink that cup. You will be baptized with that baptism. But to sit on my right hand, on my left, it's not mine to give. That's for my Father to determine. And so, seems kind of, well, obviously not seems, he is kind of teaching them a lesson there, but some of the other apostles didn't get it. And I don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us if James and John got it even, but the other ones certainly didn't get it, because what did they do? They're mad. They're upset at James and John. Almost like they're thinking, well, we should have gotten to it quicker than they did. Or maybe they're even arguing among themselves about, well, I'm a lot more worthy than John or James. Why should they be on his right hand and on his left? And here, Jesus again shows them what true greatness is. And it's a lesson that's just as needed today as it was in his day. Because people think leadership is all about barking out orders, being at the top and, kicking back and doing nothing and watching, supervising while everybody else does the work. And that's really not leadership at all. And so Peter says, not my feet only, but also my hands and head. And then Jesus says to him, verse 10, he that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit. and ye are clean, but not all. For he knew who should betray him, therefore said he, ye are not all clean. So, verse 12, after he had washed their feet and had taken his garments and was set down again, he said unto them, here's our next question. We're talking about questions Jesus asked. Know ye what I have done to you? Do you understand what I've done here? You know what I've done to you? That's the question. And we've seen the context. He's speaking to his apostles. But this one is interesting because he asks a question, but he's really going to answer this for us if we just keep reading, right? And so let's do that. He says, "You call me Master and Lord, and you say well, for so I am." You call me Master, you call me Lord. No issue with that, because he says that's who I am. I am your Master. I am your Lord. King of kings, Lord of lords, of course. But he says, if I then, your Lord and Master, and really, notice, your here is in italics. What does that mean in the King James? American Standard and some other versions. I think New King James maybe does this too. What does that indicate? It's added by the translators. The word your is not in the Greek text. They've added it. Why? Because they like changing scripture? Clarity. They did this for clarity. And as I've said before, I don't know, I was going to say 90% of the time or more, but I don't know why. It's hard to put a percentage on that. But I would say easily, more often than not, it does exactly that. It clarifies the text. And sometimes something is implied in the Greek that is not explicitly, when you're just word for word translating, it doesn't carry over. And so you need a word like that that's italicized. Here, though, I think it's interesting. It does clarify it. I'm not saying this is not one of those where, every now and then I see one, and I've mentioned before, where like, hey, it's better off without that word. I'm not saying that here. I'm just saying, think about this without that italicized word. Jesus says, if I then, Lord and Master. Well, yeah, here in this context, he's talking, if I then, your Lord, your Master. But he is just Lord, period, right? He is just Master, period. Because he's King of kings, Lord of lords. But he says, if I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant. Oh, this is powerful stuff right here. He says, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. I'm really thankful this thing can straighten your lines, because I can't draw a straight line to save my life. This little app, it'll straighten out my crooked as a snake highlights. Jesus says the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. And he says, if you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. Well, let's pause there and just make some observations about this particular question that Jesus asks. Again, he's asking this of the apostles. They're in the midst of this supper. King James has it after supper. It's one of those things that's not really going to affect the text either way, but again, I do think that the preponderance of the evidence leans toward during supper. But Jesus and the 12 they're the only ones in this. They're in this upper room, again, putting the gospel accounts together. So Jesus, he washes their feet. He gets up during supper. And does anybody remember when we talked about this? I don't know. It's been a while back when we did this class looking at some customs, some geography and things like that. A lot of it centered around some of the pictures I had from the Biblical History Center. Does anybody remember something particularly of note about Jesus getting up and doing this? Why did this even need to take place? Yeah, this is just common in their day. It's just as common courtesy as, here's somebody, they're working hard or whatever, and, maybe you see that they're just really, or it might not even be somebody working. It might just be a guest in your home. It's just as common courtesy as, would you like something to drink? Could get you something. That's what you did. But, you wouldn't necessarily do that. It depend on your financial means. You might be pretty poor, and so you have somebody in your house. You say, "Hey, here, you go and you get a basin and a towel, and let me do this act of hospitality for you." Because again, that's just what you do. But if you're wealthy, or at least wealthy enough, you have servants, and they do this. It's a menial task, but that would be what a servant would do. And it certainly wouldn't be something you would expect I think they would all agree, all 12 would agree, he's the guest of honor. Would you expect that person to get up and wash everybody's feet who had come to the dinner? That's just, you don't expect that. And yet, here they sit, and at the very least, they're in the middle of dinner. Again, going with the King James, it's possible that they were done with dinner. And maybe even before they got started, some of them were talking about, well, whose house are they in? Well, we don't know, but it's a borrowed room, right? It's Jesus had sent the disciples ahead, and it's this upper room, but it's borrowed. It's not theirs. And I can't help but wonder, this is speculation because the Bible doesn't address it, but I can't help but wonder if maybe at some point at the beginning, they're like, who's going to wash feet? And maybe you could picture one of the disciples going, I ain't doing that. Well, you think I'm a slave? Why don't you get down and wash feet? Well, I'm not doing it. Well, maybe somebody says to Peter, Jesus sent you to set things up. You and John are kind of the ones setting all this up. You should be doing that too. I don't think so. And maybe it got dropped. Maybe that continued even through supper. I don't know. But they haven't lifted a finger to do this. And Jesus doesn't say a word. He could have said, now what's going on, guys? Why has nobody got the humility, the servant's heart mentality to wash feet? What's going on? But instead, he gets up, gets a basin, he girds himself with a towel, and he starts. And don't you know that had to burn them up with embarrassment.
Were they with him when he was at the house of Simon the Pharisee?
I'd have to look at the context, see, but most of those situations that are recorded in the gospel accounts, yeah, they're with him. And so I would say in Luke 7, in the house of Simon the Pharisee, it's almost certain that they were with him, and it may even specifically say so. But yeah, he mentions there to Simon, he says, I came into your house, you didn't greet me with a kiss. She's not ceased to kiss my feet. You didn't wash my feet, a common courtesy. And she's washing my feet with her tears and her hair. It's like, and so yeah, he points that out. And assuming they were there, and again, I think if it doesn't say so explicitly, it certainly would imply it, because they were with him typically most places where he went, and generally when they weren't, the gospel accounts record it. Yeah, I don't see anything that says 100% specifically, but yeah, I don't see it just spelled out. But yeah, that'd be interesting, because probably I think it's almost certain that they would have been there for that and heard that. And they had to be feeling some shame at this point. And I think we can say that with certainty, just based off, we can say at least with certainty that one person was feeling shame because Peter's like, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus says, well, if I don't, you don't have any part with me. And then, of course, Peter says, Well, not my feet only, but my whole body. So, yes, sir.
Could you relate to what Peter said, though? They realize he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. And all of a sudden, they went in to prepare everything. So you know the bowl's sitting over there. There's probably a towel sitting over there. The meal is prepared. There's a conversation of who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They get to this meal. They're fixing to eat it now. And the common courtesy hadn't been given. And then Peter says what he did, recognize who Jesus was. You're
That's right too. For 3.5 years, they've witnessed Christ show compassion, he's taught, he's counseled, he's done all these things which were similar to this washing of feet. And now he's fixing to leave. Who's going to take up that mantle of washing feet, being compassionate, and teaching and counseling others? Because these men right here, they got to get it now.
Yeah. You see, and that's a good point. They've seen Jesus do a lot of compassionate things, service, and it's hard to imagine, even years later down the road, one that sticks out in their minds more than this. The Lord of heaven and earth getting down on his hands and knees and washing stinking, nasty feet. Feet that have been in the sandals, walking through the sandy, dirty areas. I mean, these are not clean feet that they've had their Gold Bond powder in their shoes and stuff to cut down on the odor or whatever. These are nasty feet. You talk about, and as Jimmy said, who's going to take up that mantle? And what an example he sets for them here. And I have to imagine that was seared into their mind. Adam, you were going to say something. Yeah, because they're going to be in positions of leadership. They're going to have delegated authority from Jesus. And they got to know it's not about barking out orders and, being in the limelight. It's about serving. And, man, that's a powerful lesson here dealing with pride and what it really means to be a leader. And that gets to the question that Jesus asked. Do you know what I have done to you? And that question still lingers today, and I'm convinced, I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm convinced that a lot of times we don't know. We don't get it. And that may be because of the pride issue. Sometimes you see it even in the religious world. People don't get it at all. Because Jesus, he's going to say, where is it? He says here in 15, I have given you an example. It's not about, people have foot washing ceremonies, foot washing services today. and you know what they'll do? They'll announce it. And then what happens? Well, if you're going to have a foot washing service, I can't remember, somebody in my family I think was telling me this years ago. They said it's just understood. You know the Sunday that's going to be, and you better come in and you better be just the cleanest you've ever been in your life, because that's foot washing Sunday. And you don't want somebody to see your nasty feet. Folks, that is completely 1,000% missing the whole point of what Jesus is teaching. If they wanted to come closer to getting what Jesus is teaching, then you would come in with the nastiest feet you've ever had in your life for that service. And again, whoever it was, I'm pretty sure it was a relative of mine that was telling me this, said you just one foot. You wash one foot, and that's it. And we've had our foot washing service. What Jesus is teaching them here has nothing to do, per se, with feet. It's service. And it's the service that other people might think, I'm not doing that. I've seen it. You've seen it, no doubt. Maybe it's in the workplace. It might be a piece of trash on the floor, and somebody says, could you get that? And you say, I'm not the janitor. Or somebody says, hey, could you do such and such? Not my job. It's not my job description. Maybe there's a mess in the bathroom. Somebody says, not my job, clean that up. We pay so-and-so to do that. How can I serve others? That's what Jesus is getting at here. It's not about some kind of religious service. Hey, if there's a need, it might be dirty hands, it might be dirty feet, it might be dirty lives that we're trying to help people clean up. But serve. That's true leadership, and that's being like Jesus. And he says, I've given you an example. Folks, let's make sure as followers of Jesus that we follow that example, and let's serve others. Thank y'all very much. We'll have a short break before worship this morning. God willing, next week we'll look at one more question in John 13 and then move on.